Tonight at 10, England enters another period of national lockdown, enforced by law, with people ordered to stay at home. It will be imposed from the early hours of Wednesday morning. The Prime Minister said the surging pandemic made it essential, but he said there was hope with the new vaccines.
The weeks ahead will be the hardest yet, but I really do believe that we're entering the last phase of the struggle, because with every jab that goes into our arms, we are tilting the odds against COVID.
All schools in England will be closed to most pupils until after the February half-term at the earliest. In Scotland, people are also ordered to stay at home, and schools there will remain closed to pupils until the 1st of February at the earliest.
We are now seeing a steeply rising trend of infections. Indeed, it is no exaggeration to say that I am more concerned about the situation we face now than I have been at any time since March last year.
These are decisions politicians wanted to avoid, but the virus has outpaced their efforts to keep up with it, so Scotland and England's doors will close again.
More from Laura in a second. The latest measures were agreed on following reports that the NHS would be overwhelmed if tougher action wasn't taken now. Experts say that hospitals in many areas are now under more pressure from COVID than at any time since the start of the pandemic. We'll be reporting from South Africa, where scientists say there is reasonable concern that a new variant of COVID-19 might be more resistant to current vaccines. But there is still huge relief nonetheless that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine has started its rollout today, with a plan to vaccinate at least 10 million people by mid-February.
And coming up in sport on BBC News, after Southampton took an early lead against Liverpool, could the Premier League leaders come back to get a result at St Mary's?
Good evening. Boris Johnson has announced that England will once again enter a period of lockdown tonight, to be enforced by law from the early hours of Wednesday morning. In a televised address from Downing Street, the Prime Minister said he believed this was a pivotal moment in the fight against the pandemic and that the weeks ahead would be the hardest yet. England has now joined Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland in implementing tougher new restrictions, faced with a surging number of new cases. Mr Johnson said that people living in England should stay at home and could only leave for exceptional reasons. Those include shopping for essential items and going to work where people can't work from home. Like in the previous lockdowns, outdoor exercise is allowed. Those who are extremely clinically vulnerable are being asked to shield again. And all schools in England will be closed to most pupils with online learning until after the February half-term at the earliest. And most GCSE and A-level exams are not likely to go ahead in England this year. But on this day of unrelenting gloom, there is nonetheless a significant cause for hope, because the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine has started its rollout today, following Pfizer last month, with a plan to vaccinate at least 10 million people by mid-February. More on the vaccine in a moment, but first our political editor Laura Kuenssberg on the day's events.
Since the pandemic began last year, the whole United Kingdom has been engaged in a great national effort to fight COVID.
An effort that isn't over, not even close, as Downing Street points the finger of blame at the new variant spreading fast.
As I speak to you tonight, our hospitals are under more pressure from COVID than at any time since the start of the pandemic. With most of the country already under extreme measures, it's clear that we need to do more. That means the government is once again instructing you to stay at home.
That includes children who he said should go to school just this morning. Our kitchen tables or shared sofas become offices and classrooms again.
Primary schools, secondary schools and colleges across England must move to remote provision from tomorrow, except for vulnerable children and the children of key workers.
This might feel agonisingly familiar, but there is one big difference.
We're now rolling out the biggest vaccination programme in our history. By the middle of February, if things go well and with a fair wind in our sails, we expect to have offered the first vaccine dose to everyone in the 4 top priority groups.
Nearly 14 million offers planned to the most vulnerable and the most elderly. The doors could be unlocked in about 6 weeks, but there's a list of big ifs.
If the rollout of the vaccine programme continues to be successful, if deaths start to fall as the vaccine takes effect, and critically, if everyone plays their part by following the rules, then I hope we can steadily move out of lockdown, reopening schools after the February half-term and starting cautiously to move regions down the tiers. I want to say to everyone right across the UK that I know how tough this is, but now, more than ever, we must pull together. The weeks ahead will be the hardest yet, but I really do believe that we're entering the last phase of the struggle, because with every jab that goes into our arms, we are tilting the odds against COVID and in favour of the British people.
So with the force of the law, most of life will retreat again behind closed doors. Chairs on tables, empty streets, silent dinner halls, corridors falling quiet in every corner of the UK.
I know that the next few weeks will be incredibly difficult. I'm sorry to ask for further sacrifices after 9 long months of them, but these sacrifices are necessary.
These are decisions that politicians never wanted to have to take again. But choices they've made because beds, wards and hospitals are filling in a way that could threaten all kinds of care.
We cannot keep going in this direction, or our National Health Service will fall over. It will not be able to cope with what is going on, and I'm quite sure our community does not want us to be in that situation.
The measures for England will come into law in the early hours of Wednesday. MPs will have a vote after that, but there's unlikely to be much resistance.
These measures are necessary, sadly, and therefore we support the package of measures that the Prime Minister has just outlined. And I think whatever our criticisms and challenges of the government, we've all got to pull together now to make this work.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Hi.
This time, the hope, a needle in millions of arms, provides the way out of all of this. But the lockdown we'll live through first is far from being a quick sting. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, as I mentioned a short while ago, all schools in England will close to most pupils from tomorrow until the February half-term at the earliest, and summer exams, GCSEs, A-levels, will mostly be cancelled. Our education editor, Bronwyn Jeffries, has more details.
Some schools did not reopen today, staff too worried about the new variant of COVID. Tonight, the Prime Minister accepting the virus spreads in schools.
And I want to stress that the problem is not that schools are unsafe for children. Children are still very unlikely to be severely affected by even the new variant of COVID. The problem is that schools may nonetheless act as vectors for transmission, causing the virus to spread between households.
For secondary schools and teenagers, another massive U-turn. GCSEs and A-levels will be cancelled. Emily, due to sit 7 GCSEs, and her mum Nicola were stunned.
I was just really shocked and really upset. I felt like I've done so much work. The GCSEs have been like my whole entire goal for 2 whole years. I don't know how the teachers are going to, I don't know what evidence they've got now and what the plan is. There's nothing, there was a statement and then nothing else. So we feel like the rug's been pulled out from under us a little bit now.
For children just reunited with friends, now more remote learning at home. Education unions say it's the right decision, made late.
We've thrown together thousands and thousands of families today for a day and exposed them to that risk of infection, and whether that was necessary or not it is now called into question. What the government's really got to do is work with the profession. We can see things happening on the ground before it comes through in data sets.
Right. This primary school in Warrington was open today. They are ready to stream lessons online. but say that's a challenge for many families.
Children find it very difficult to access the live streaming lessons that we offer online. Our online offer is a very strong and robust offer, but it doesn't mean that all our children will be able to access it because they don't have enough devices or they don't have the internet capacity.
A primary teacher, Owen, is at home recovering from COVID. A pupil tested positive at the end of last term. By the new year, Owen was in hospital. He says the Prime Minister had to act.
I was pretty scared at some point, and especially when I looked around the ward. I was in this acute ward for I think we've got to get a lid on it, and as quickly and as securely as we can before start really opening schools and things back up again properly and fully.
Everything has changed for them this year. Now it's changing again. Bronwyn Jeffries, BBC News.
So let's go live to Westminster and talk to our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg. Laura, let's put today's events into the context of action now being taken in all 4 nations of the UK.
That's right, Hugh. An action that politicians in every corner of the UK wanted to avoid at all costs. There's no question about that. This is something that politicians were very, very reluctant to do. But very strong statements publicly, and I understand a pretty strong push privately from all of the chief medical officers across the country, basically left politicians feeling that they had no choice really but to take more of our choices away from all of us, and to once again say that the country has to stay at home. You can see from the numbers and statistics that we've been hearing about today how this new strain of coronavirus hasn't just gone up gradually in a graph. It's not just even gone up in a strong curve. It's almost going up in a straight line, defying the kind of expectation that anybody might have had of it. And the knock-on effect of that on the health service is there for all to see. So the fact is that politicians have come to this place reluctantly, but they have felt that they have had no option but to take this. Now, for Boris Johnson in particular's critics, this will see as more evidence of him only wanting to make decisions at the last minute, always being caught behind the curve rather than being out in front of the pandemic. I think even his supporters would acknowledge that he is more comfortable being the deliverer of good news rather than wanting to confront things that are really bad and difficult to hear in public. But just remember, though, while COVID is absolutely at the forefront of politicians' minds right now, the impacts that come along with another lockdown like this, pressure on the economy, the impact on kids being out of school, and of course pressure on other kinds of health beyond the pandemic are very, very serious too. These decisions are not ones that have been easy to take for any of our leaders.
Laura, many thanks again. Laura Kuenssberg there with the latest for us at Westminster. Well, from midnight tonight, Scotland is introducing a new lockdown similar to the one imposed back in March at the start of the pandemic. On the mainland, it will be a legal requirement to stay at home for all of January for anything other than essential purposes, and people must work from home if at all possible. People will be able to meet only one other person outdoors from another household, but that doesn't include children aged 11 and under. Across the whole of Scotland, schools will be closed and provide online learning only until at least the 1st of February. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says she is more concerned about the situation now than at any other time since March. Our Scotland correspondent James Cook is in Glasgow with the latest for us tonight.
Well, Hugh, scientists reckon that Scotland is perhaps a month behind London in terms of this latest wave of the virus, but the situation is still serious here. To give you an example, one health board area, NHS Ayrshire and Arran, is said to be running at 96% of its COVID capacity. That's why these restrictions are coming in now. That's why there is a new lockdown in what is beginning to look like a pretty bleak midwinter. New year, new lockdown to tackle a new variant of the virus. It's a public holiday here. The streets should be packed with shoppers. Instead, mainland Scotland is heading for even tighter restrictions.
It is no exaggeration to say that I am more concerned about the situation we face now than I have been at any time since March last year. Our fundamental advice for everyone is to stay at home. That is the single best way of staying safe. We consider that this stay-at-home message and advice is now so important that from tomorrow it will become law, just as it was in the lockdown last year.
Without action, said the First Minister, the NHS could be overwhelmed in weeks, a concern echoed by her rivals.
The increase in infection rate and the transmissibility of the new variant gives grave cause for concern. We have come too far to throw all our efforts away, and the rollout of the vaccine means that we can see a time soon when all this will begin to be over.
And all this means that for most pupils in Scottish schools and nurseries, the holidays will go on and on. The schools are going to be closed until the 1st of February at least in Scotland. What's your reaction to that?
Devastated. I'm due to go back to work on Thursday and I've just had about 20 months off. So I'm just going back to work and I've got a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old.
I'm sad because I don't get to see my friends sometimes, and because I like going to school to do like work and stuff and see my friends and play with them.
So this has been a difficult day for parents, a difficult day for a lot of people in Scotland. In some ways, it feels like we're going backwards all the way to the lockdown of last spring. But this time there is a difference. There is some cause for hope. That hope comes in a bottle. But who should get the vaccine first? One former Scottish Labour leader and teacher says school staff should be prioritised.
We need the 4 governments of the United Kingdom to get together and to decide once and for all, for this pandemic and for any future emergencies, that schools are critical infrastructure, that children need to learn. They need to be in organised learning environments, and we need solutions that keep that happening and not the sort of panic measures that we see today.
The Scottish Government denies panicking, but ministers do want people to heed their warning that right now the whole nation is on thin ice. James Cook, BBC News, Glasgow.
So that's the picture there in Scotland. We spoke about England earlier. Let's talk about Northern Ireland and Wales. We'll be talking to Emma Vardy, who's in Stormont in Northern Ireland in a moment. First, our correspondent Howell Griffith at the Senedd in Cardiff. Howell, just to take us through the kind of measures that are now enforced already, of course, in Wales, and how, in a sense, they compare with what's just across the border in England.
Yes, well, Wales has been in a national lockdown for the last 2 weeks. The instruction to stay at home has been enforced here since December the 20th. So all non-essential retail has been closed over the Christmas period. Gyms closed too, hospitality all closed. And although there's a review of all of that at the end of this week, we've been told those measures are likely to stay in place until the end of January. But new measures have been brought in. This evening, the Welsh Government has pushed back school closures, so no face-to-face learning in schools or colleges until at least January the 18th. Now, that means going back to school earlier than Scotland or England. It may be that date is pushed back once again. We should say case numbers are improving in Wales. They're going down, but they're still at around 450 per 100,000. Very, very high. And the pressure on the front line is extreme. More COVID patients now than at any time last year.
Howell, the Senedd in Cardiff, thank you very much. Howell Griffith there. So let's go to Stormont and join Emma Vardy. Emma, the picture in Northern Ireland tonight.
Well, look, the Stormont Executive held an urgent meeting tonight because the situation in Northern Ireland has been escalating rapidly, and the Executive released a statement this evening. Remember, we're already in a second week of a 6-week lockdown here, but they now say that there will be a return to an extended period of online learning at school. So what that means is that lots of pupils here who were due to return to the classroom next week, well, they now won't be in future. Political leaders here said that was regrettable, but that is now the situation they are facing with. Also discussion today around the issue of compliance. Lots of concern that a number of people weren't following the rules over the Christmas period. We know that the PSNI, the police in Northern Ireland, had to shut down around 100 house parties in just a week. And we heard from the Deputy First Minister, Michelle O'Neill, calling for people to take a renewed sense of seriousness to the rules at the moment, asking people to approach this in the same way people did back in March when this was all very new. And we are likely now to see the stay-at-home rule in Northern Ireland put back into the regulations so that it will be in future more legally enforceable.
Emma, thank you very much again. Emma Vardy in Stormont and Howell Griffith in Cardiff. Well, as I mentioned earlier in the programme, the first doses of the new Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine have been administered during the course of the day. Hundreds of vaccination sites are expected to open this week, with over 500,000 doses already delivered to the NHS. Our medical editor Fergus Walsh has more, and just a warning, there's some flashing images coming up.
Another key moment in the fight back against coronavirus. 82-year-old Brian Pinker became the first person in the world to receive the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine since it was approved.
Okay. Hi.
He has dialysis 3 times a week and so is clinically vulnerable.
The vaccine means everything to me. I mean, to my mind, it's the only way of getting back to a bit of normal life. You know, this virus is terrible, isn't it?
It was here in Oxford that this vaccine was created and where trials began in April last year. So fitting that it should be one of 6 hospital trusts in England to begin administering the jab.
It was a huge privilege. Every single patient that we've vaccinated over the last couple of weeks have got their own personal story as to the difference it's going to make for them. So no different this morning with our first 2 patients.
Now the queue to receive the vaccine is already forming here. There is huge public interest in the rollout of this vaccine. The government has ordered 100 million doses. The key question, though, is how quickly can the priority groups be immunised? There are 31 million people in those priority groups. Top of the list are care home residents and workers. The aim is to have immunised all of them by the end of the month. The over 80s and frontline health workers are also in the first wave. Then, in descending age groups from 75 plus down to the over 50s. Other key groups are clinically extremely vulnerable people and those with underlying health conditions.
We've already delivered over 1 million vaccines of the Pfizer jab, and now we've got the AstraZeneca one. So we aim to get it into people's arms as quickly as it is supplied to us. If we get 2 million doses a week, our aim is to get 2 million doses into the arms of those priority groups.
Also among the first to be immunised was the doctor who led the global trials of the Oxford jab. He emphasised the importance of mass vaccination.
Fantastic getting it myself. Anyone who's eligible and offered the vaccine, whichever one it is, needs to come forward and be vaccinated, because we have to have the massive rollout ahead of us over the next few months, and we need speed to do that.
The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine can be stored in a fridge, a key advantage over the Pfizer vaccine, which has to be transported at -70. It will also play a key role in global immunisation. 3 billion doses are set to be distributed worldwide this year.
And our medical editor Fergus Walsh is with me now in the studio, and I suppose the big question for everyone, Fergus, is what's the timetable here for vaccination? How many people in what kind of time?
OK, so there are 31 million people, Hugh, in the vaccine priority groups, and the government has said tonight it intends to offer a first dose of the vaccine to 13 million of them by mid-February. Now, they're the top 4 groups: care home residents and staff, all those over 70, frontline health and social care workers, and the extremely clinically vulnerable. Now, not everyone will take up that offer, but it's still an extremely ambitious target: 2 million people a week for the next 6 weeks. Now, everything will have to go really smoothly, because each batch of vaccine, whether Pfizer or the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, has to pass quality controls. There should be 1,000 vaccination centres set up across the UK by the end of the week. Now, Boris Johnson has said tonight that the UK has carried out more COVID immunisation than the rest of Europe put together, but it now gives a target against which the government's immunisation programme can be judged in the weeks ahead. And all those people will eventually need a second dose after 12 weeks. Now, amid some very sombre news tonight, it is at least a bright point, and it is vaccination ultimately is the route out of this pandemic.
Fergus, once again, many thanks. Fergus Walsh there, our medical editor. All of which brings me to the latest government figures, and they show that there were 58,784 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. The average number of new cases reported per day in the past week is now 54,833. 407 deaths were reported. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID test. But today's figures, by the way, don't include Scotland, and they are usually somewhat lower after the weekend. Now, that means on average in the past week, 611 deaths were announced every day, and it takes the total number of deaths so far across the UK to 75,431. Well, as we've heard, the COVID threat is to be raised to the highest level 5 across the UK following a warning from all 4 chief medical officers that the health services are at risk of being overwhelmed within 3 weeks. With coronavirus cases continuing to rise rapidly, driven by the new variant of the virus, the number of COVID-19 patients in hospitals across the UK is also increasing sharply. Our health editor Hugh Pym has the latest for us.
On the front line of a major London hospital today. Here at St George's, staff say it's exceptionally busy after a big increase in admissions of COVID patients. Over the weekend, they've been struck by the number requiring oxygen support, and that's meant doubling capacity for oxygen supplies, which is no easy matter.
We have had several whole families admitted. Quite a lot of those people haven't been older people. They haven't been people with lots of medical problems. They have been young and fit people who have been themselves shocked at how unwell they've got and how quickly they've become unwell.
Annabelle's whole family was struck by the virus. She and her mother Maria were struggling to breathe and were admitted to Leicester Royal Infirmary. They were brought together in intensive care, but less than 24 hours later, Maria died.
It's literally just torn my family into tiny pieces. I understand everyone's situation is different and we are at different points in our lives, but just to take a moment to put yourself in my shoes, and if that would make you perhaps rethink what you're going to do that day.
London hospitals are under extreme pressure, and it's the same in other areas of southern England. In the southeast, total COVID patient numbers in hospitals are now well above where they were at the peak last April. And it's a similar story in the east of England, with patient numbers rising rapidly in recent weeks. The chief executive of the Countess of Chester Hospital said 40% of beds were occupied by COVID patients and stressed there was a problem affecting more areas than just London. Community leaders in Cumbria, meanwhile, warned that the situation was getting worse.
It's extremely serious. The risk to the hospitals in the north is quite severe at the moment. They have more coronavirus patients in the hospitals than they have ever had.
In some parts of London, virus cases as a proportion of the population have gone up 25% in a week. That's why hospitals like this one are under increasing strain. And at a time when there are higher levels of staff sickness and those needing to self-isolate, things could get even tougher in the weeks ahead. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
So the result of all of today's measures, as announced by the Prime Minister, is that all of England will now be entering Tier 4. So let's talk to my colleague Danny Savage, who's in Leeds, which has been moved from Tier 3 to Tier 4. And really, I want to talk, Danny, about the picture across northern England. So what can you tell us?
Hugh, Leeds and the wider Yorkshire and Humber area are in Tier 3 at the moment, but it does feel locally as though lockdown's already begun. We're just across the road from the main bus station. Services have been coming and going from there all evening. Haven't seen a single passenger on any one of them, but it's less than a week since large parts of northern England were still down in Tier 2, places like North Yorkshire and Cumbria. And in Cumbria, the infection rate really has taken off over the last week or so. 2 of the 3 main hospitals are now on the highest state of alert. The Director of Public Health there called for primary schools not to open this morning. He's got what he wanted, but 24 hours later than when he asked for it. And the latest figures for Northern England look pretty dire, to be honest. They've been analysed this evening, and areas which are seeing the biggest rise in the number of coronavirus cases are clustering in the north of England at the moment. This area looks as though it's going to be hit very hard by the new variant in the coming week or two, Hugh.
Danny, many thanks once again. Danny Savage there, our correspondent in Leeds. Now, for details of the rules and restrictions where you live, because there's quite a lot to consider, if you have a look at the BBC website, the BBC News website, bbc.co.uk bbc.co.uk/news. You'll see all of the 4 nations there, and you'll see the links to all of the information, including the Prime Minister's statement today and the First Minister's statement in Scotland. So have a look at that, and the details are all there for you. So let's take a look at some of today's other news now. Then French authorities have defended the rollout of the vaccination programme there, following criticism that it was far too slow. Only 516 vaccinations were dispensed in the first week. A spokesman said the delay was because clinicians had to enter care homes and get a resident's permission before administering the injection. Germany is expected to extend its lockdown until the 31st of January to try to curb the spread of the virus. Tight restrictions have been in place since the middle of December, but have so far had little effect. Last week, the country reported a record number of daily deaths, over 1,000, and ballooning infection rates. Now, the Health Secretary for England, Matt Hancock, has said that he is very worried about the new South African variant of coronavirus. There are fears it may be even more transmissible than the new UK variant. In order to stop the spread of the South African variant, flights to the UK from that country have been banned since Christmas Eve. Our correspondent Andrew Harding reports now from Johannesburg.
A strict new lockdown across South Africa, complete with a nighttime curfew and a total ban on the sale of alcohol. The authorities here struggling to contain an aggressive new variant of the virus. That variant, just like the one in Britain, has made COVID-19 far easier to catch and to transmit.
You see how short of breath you are, eh?
The result, hospitals are filling up fast and precious oxygen supplies are running low. Early evidence suggests the virus here is probably no more transmissible or more deadly than the British variant, but that's still being tested.
So the jury is still out, we still don't have a definitive answer. But generally, viruses evolve to become more transmissible, but less virulent. Hopefully, this virus will obey that same dictum.
But there is another worry. While Britain's virus has 1 significant mutation, South Africa's has 3, including one that might make the virus more resistant to current vaccines.
The concern in South Africa is that the variant that has been identified has got at least 3 mutations, which could potentially impact on the antibody that's induced by the vaccine to neutralize the virus.
So it's a serious concern.
I think it is a theoretical concern at this point in time, and hopefully within the course of the next few weeks, we'll have a clear answer.
The good news is that South African scientists are now working fast to get that answer. The bad news is that there is a significant risk that the virus here has changed to give itself at least a partial resistance to the current vaccines. Still, experts say adjusting those vaccines should be relatively easy. In the meantime, a second wave of infections continues to spread fast across South Africa. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Johannesburg.
A judge at the Old Bailey has ruled that the WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange, cannot be extradited to the United States to face trial for the release of tens of thousands of confidential military and diplomatic documents which happened a decade ago. She said that his mental health problems meant that he would be at risk of suicide. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landell picks up the story.
Julian Assange has long attracted loyal supporters, and this was their reaction outside the Old Bailey as they heard the news. For more than a decade, the WikiLeaks founder has resisted extradition, spending 7 years holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, before being removed almost 2 years ago and detained in Belmarsh prison. The US authorities want him to face 18 charges, mostly of espionage, relating to his alleged role in the leaking of thousands of secret military documents. Many focused on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, including this video appearing to show a US helicopter firing on civilians in Baghdad. To some, Mr. Assange is a champion of free speech who revealed war crimes. To others, a lawbreaker who endangered the lives of US agents. And today, after years of legal battles, he was driven into court to hear his fate. From the dock he listened as District Judge Vanessa Baraitser dismissed his defence that the US charges were political and a threat to media freedom. But when it came to his mental health and depression, she ruled that in a US high-security prison, the risk that Mr Assange will commit suicide is a substantial one, and as such, it would be oppressive to extradite him to the United States. On hearing the ruling, Mr Assange simply wiped his brow. His partner and mother of his 2 sons, Stella Morris, burst into tears.
We are pleased that the court has recognised the seriousness and inhumanity of what he has endured and what he faces. But let's not forget, the indictment in the US has not been dropped.
The US Department of Justice said it was extremely disappointed and would appeal against the ruling. Mr Assange was remanded in custody ahead of a bail application later this week. James Landell, BBC News.
Now, before we leave you tonight, a little more on the main story, those new restrictions announced today, and our health editor Hugh Pym is here. We've been talking about the measures, Hugh, but it's worth reminding viewers at this point, before these come into force now in many areas, what's led to this, the state of affairs that's led to this.
Well, Hugh, the UK's 4 chief medical officers have made it abundantly clear that without some sort of action, the NHS, in their own words, in some parts of the country would simply be overwhelmed in 3 weeks' time. And just looking at some of the figures, that underlines that message. In England, we haven't had figures for other parts of the UK yet for today. More than 26,500 people are in hospitals in England with COVID-19, up 3,000 in just 3 days. And up nearly a third in a week. And remember, these are people who first got the virus maybe 2 weeks ago, and then, unfortunately for them, have ended up seriously ill in hospital. The current case increases we're seeing, newly reported cases, up by 50% week on week. Some of them will become seriously ill, sadly, but that won't come through into hospitals for another couple of weeks. That's the pressure already in the system, and lockdowns will take a little time as well to take effect. So hopefully, as last year, March, April, lockdowns will bring down the case numbers. But with this new variant, some experts are saying tonight, we can't be totally sure how long that'll take.
OK, Hugh, once again, many thanks. Hugh Pym there, our health editor, with a final word on what's been going on today. That's it now on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.